Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Juan Peña wash process Ecuador from Flower Child Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Flower Child, based out of Oakland, California. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions this year, as they've offered a number of very interesting Ecuadorian coffees, including the Arnaud Case coffees, as well as a couple of Mejorados, including this one right here. This is a coffee that we have reviewed from a number of coffee roasters already this year. So when I did see Flower Child release it, it felt like a great opportunity to compare and contrast it to some of the other ones we've had earlier this year. So it'll be interesting to see how they did on this one, as this right here is day 44. And recipe we went with for this one was actually our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, this one's much more in line with our previous experiences with Flower Child, as this one definitely skewed on the lighter side of things, as Flower Child is one of the lighter roasting American coffee roasters out there. It is actually pretty similar to the one that we have had from Say as well. So this is a very light coffee by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 17, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and this coffee was surprisingly more intense and sweet than we were expecting, even for a Juan Peña Mejorado coffee. And I think a lot of our expectations came from our previous experiences with Flower Child in general, as their Abel sweetness was the least sweet and intense of the Mejorado coffees that we had actually had. So there was plenty of the listed passion fruit aspects with a very strong sugariness to the cup. A notable bit of brown candy sweetness also present within the finish, so it was a pretty good start, just much more intense than initially expected. Day 20 opted for the Chemex, and it's still very sweet in a lingering and long-lasting sugary sense once again. The cup has a little bit less of the intensity than some of the previous experiences, or I guess the previous experience we'd had, skewing a little bit more on the citric side of things with a slight bit of brightness as well. So it's still pretty good, just once again, still more in the direction that we weren't necessarily expecting. Day 23 opted for the April brewer, and this was interestingly the most generic and undefined it had been, especially right off brew, which was surprising given how much the cup opens up as it cools. There's an abundance of sweet intensity to the cup, including plenty of the sugary sweetness, with the previously mentioned bit of brightness also still, citric brightness also still present, and ever so slight bitterness to the cup as well, but it seems to contrast the rest of it pretty nicely, as the overall sweetness and intensity to it needed something to kind of counteract that. Day 26 through the V60 with higher temperatures and a more fine grind, and the coffee was even more intense. The most intense cup of coffee we had ever had from Flower Child, as it has such a strong tropical intensity to it, right at the forefront that lingers in a very lively sense. The cup is very sugary and it embraces some very strong honeysuckle-like components, so a very wild experience, especially for a wash process coffee, especially one from Flower Child. Day 29 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and this is possibly the best it has been, as it is still offering tremendous sweetness with a slightly overall, with a little bit of the overall intensity toned down. Very strong sugariness yet again with the honeysuckle and tropical intensity, those two things being ever-present components within this one. Continue on to day 32 as the cup continues to remain surprisingly intense with immediate liveliness right after the coffee is brewed, closely followed by intense sweetness and a lingering brightness. There is a very strong, sweeter floral honey attribute in the cup that is nearly dominating the entirety of it. So that's just how strong the honeysuckle-like aspect was within this one. In a ways, a slight bit of the persimmon sweetness and a just overall intense cup all around. Day 35 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and the cup is the best it has been up to this point. And the reason we went back to our standard recipe was because we actually did need to tone this one down a little bit. The higher extraction adjustments we had made lent itself towards just being a little too intense, which is a really surprising thing for me to say when it comes to this coffee in general, but once again, it just had so much of that, offering plenty of the sweeter honeysuckle Mejorado brown candy sweetness. In addition to that, some sweeter citric qualities with the tropical component and strong sugariness, really being ever-present components within this one. It's been pretty consistent. It's definitely one of the more consistent coffees we've also had from Flower Child in general. Better, We move on to our final day on day 38 when we'll try through the Chemex, and it continues to offer consistency. It has the slight maple waffle sort of sweetness, but mostly just strong sugary sweetness in general. Plenty of these strong floral aspects with a slight citric as well as tropical quality remaining ever present within this one. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can't see what we're getting. And one level 5, that is the sweetness, and I don't think that will come as a surprise to anybody, given how I've been discussing this coffee right from the start. Definitely and easily the sweetest coffee that we've ever had from Flower Child up to this point. We've had some sweet ones. The Abel Salinas was a little sweet, maybe not to the extent that we were hoping or expecting, and in addition to that, the Arnaud Casse was also surprisingly sweeter than we were expecting, but this one definitely takes the cake in terms of the overall sweetness of it, as it is sweet in a number of different ways. The maple-like sweetness, the brown candy-like sweetness, and just the overall sugary sweetness that's present within this coffee. Then we have a bunch of level 4s. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. It's a pretty clean coffee. There's nothing to take away from that in any regard, given that you just feel the definition and clarity to this one in just so many different directions. Of course, the florality specifically, and then the just sugary sweetness that's present within this one. Definitely a very clean coffee. Finish. Level 4, interestingly, there are times where I could say higher side of level 4, maybe even on the lower side of level 5, given just how much sweet intensity there is to this coffee. And even then, a little bit of that tropical intensity. I think they had passion fruit listed as one of the notes for this coffee, and I could definitely see that given there's just such a strong tropical intensity to it. Florality, level 4. Once again, the honeysuckle-like component was one of the more defined aspects within this coffee, and it was definitely present and prominent throughout. And given that it was also coming in that sweeter Mejorado-like sense, and you were definitely feeling a fair bit of that, definitely a justified level 4 on that one. Grapefruit, level 4. As mentioned, it's that tropical berry brightness. So once again, passion fruit, I think, is the main thing that they had listed on there, and you can see it. It's just a lot of the tropical aspects that are within this coffee in a lighter tropical sense. Citrus fruit, level 4. Same sort of thing. You're definitely experiencing some sweeter tropical aspects of this one, though this one I would have to say is a little bit more of a generic citric quality to it. Even then, plenty of that within this coffee. Caramel, level 4. That, of course, is the classic Mejorado brown candy sweetness, though maybe at times I could say that it's skewed a little bit more on that slightly honey side of things, as I know some people see the Mejorado brown candy sweetness as being either like a toffee, butterscotch, or caramel, and some others see it as being just a very sweet and intense honey component to it. Nonetheless, regardless of where you want to or how you want to describe it, it is there at that level 4 mark. And then we have 2 level 3s that are worth discussing. We'll start with the acidity level 3. I think I was probably surprised that the brightness wasn't overly high. The Mejorado coffees, I feel like I've had mixed experiences where some I'm like, they're very bright, and the other ones I'm like, okay, they're not necessarily quite as bright. And this one I don't feel was maybe as bright as some of the other experiences we'd had from some of the other Mejorado coffees. So for that reason, it is at the level 3, higher side of level 3 nonetheless, but maybe not necessarily as bright as some other coffees we've had from Flower Child. Stone fruit, level 3. And there is a slight bit of a peachy quality to it, and that's something that I do experience from these Mejorado coffees as well. And when I'm able to experience that, especially in more notable abundance, then it's something that I very much enjoy. I would say that there's also a little bit more of a tropical sense to it. Once again, maybe a little bit more of like a mango-like component, but nonetheless, you are experiencing a little bit of those stone fruit aspects as well. And then last thing worth discussing, body level 2. I think that's a number of factors. The Mejorados don't necessarily always have the most amount of body. And in addition to that, it was brewed with the Chemex, so I think those two things definitely played a role in that. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's kind of interesting to think about. I know I liked it more than the Abel Salinas, and I'm not entirely sure if I liked it more than the Arnaud Casse, mostly because that one really surprised me in a good way. This one surprised me in a much more neutral and moderate way, as this one was not quite what I was expecting. This one was just much more sweet and intense than I was expecting, and I think a lot of my expectations were based off of the Abel Salinas experience that we'd had, given that that one wasn't quite as intense or strong as the other versions of that same coffee we had had from other coffee roasters. So for that reason, that's what I was expecting from this one, but they went in a complete opposite direction, as this one was pretty similar to the Say in a number of ways, but other than that, I do have to say that it just really surprised me with the overall intensity, and it's something that I keep going back to, but it's mostly because this isn't something that I traditionally experience from Flower Child's coffees in general. I do have to say that at the end of the day, though, it was a good thing. It's probably my favorite of the 4 Ecuadorian coffees we've discussed from them this year, barely above that Arnaud Casse Bourbon, but even then, it was just a very nice coffee, much more in line with what I'm typically looking for from these Mejorado coffees. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you're looking for something that offers so much of the intense sweetness that the Mejorado coffees have in a lighter profile, this one's a really good fit for you, as it offers all of the things that you're looking for: great clarity, sweetness, a very notable fruit profile, but most specifically a lot of that florality, the 4 big things that I'm looking for within coffee. A little bit of a lighter bodied profile to it, but outside of that, just some nice depth and overall complexity within this coffee. For the most part, though, I think that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try the coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Juan Peña wash processed Ecuador from Flower Child Coffee. Thank you for watching.